Welcome to the Asian Women of Power podcast, where your host, Kimchi Chow, shares tips, tools, insights, and strategies on how you too can create the life you love with freedom, power, and choice. Kimchi will show you how to break free of your cultural boundaries and boldly live the life of your dreams. If you are ready to transform your life, please go to www.asianwomenofpowerquiz.com and take the quiz. You may qualify for a free discovery session with Kimchi. And now, here's your host, Kimchi Chow.
Have you ever wondered why kids misbehave? Were they aware of the consequences of their actions? Do they ever want to stop those behaviors? Do they know how? Today, we will hear from two courageous guests who will share with us how they became reckless when they were young and how they turned their life around. I encourage you to listen up closely with open minds. I'm pleased to introduce Melissa, Shrestha, and Deepak Sharma. Welcome. So let's start with Deepak. From your own experience growing up, what triggered the rebellious in you?
So I would say that the rebellious side of me started probably when I was in my early teens, probably around 14 or 15, and I think it was not necessarily going against what my parents didn't want me to do. It wasn't really to go against them. It was more to try to comfort myself based on where I was in my head. And so, I started drinking around the 14, 15-year space. And in that moment, I think I was just trying to figure myself out, trying to see where I fit in, and not necessarily feeling like I fit in. And so alcohol gave me a way to be around other people that were doing something similar and have friendships. And at the same time, that was my goal, but then, it kind of slipped further and further into drinking, as I got, further into my high school years. Melissa, when did you start your rebellious side?
Yeah, for me, I guess it really depends on what rebellious actually consists of. So for me, when I was very young, let's say, I think I was at the age of, around 10 years old, I recall my family getting very upset at me with things that I would say and things that I would do. So for me, it really, I guess, for me, when I look at that question, I go, is rebellious drinking and, getting involved in illicit substances, or is it merely talking back to your parents? And in that case, when I was very young, I would talk back to my parents quite a lot. I was born in the UK and I was raised there. I lived there until I was 15 or so, 14, and then I moved to Australia. And my parents would always get very, very frustrated at me when I was younger. And that came from a few things. It came from, when I looked different, I was very different from my peers, and I started getting frustrated at my parents. And I started to feel like I didn't belong to them. I thought that I was adopted. I thought that my thinking was very different from theirs. So I guess in terms of rebellious, they would always get frustrated when I would talk back to them and be like, why are you hitting me? This is not okay. Or please don't come to school and follow me around at school because it's not what other parents do. Where I grew up, it was a very Anglo-centric. It was everyone around me, my peers were white. They were all British. And for me, my parents were the most stringent. They were the most strict. And the ways that I kind of rebelled was to, I guess, follow what they did. And my family were like, this is not okay. Wherever you go out, I need to have their numbers. I need to have their address. What do their parents do? What do they do? And I'm like, well, come on, like I'm in primary school. They're students in primary school. So there's not much to it. But yeah. And I guess from that, it spiraled into me starting to lie about their numbers, me starting to lie about what their parents do, me starting to stay out at night and pretending that I was at another friend's house that they trusted. So I guess that's the kind of beginning of that rebellious behavior, where it then grew into other things like alcohol, staying out late at night, jobs that probably weren't for someone my age. So yeah, to put it in a nutshell.
Well, sure. And as you say that, I kind of can relate back to, I think part of it was that my parents, I mean, they moved from India to the US a year before I was born. And so they didn't really understand, what I was going through. And so they were trying to give me advice, but they really had no idea. And I kind of believed that they didn't. And so I was definitely talking back to them. I definitely wasn't listening because I felt like I wasn't getting good advice. And it was the same thing where I was trying to maintain, what the standard of cultural norms were here in the US, but then they were doing things that, were consistent with what was going on in India. And I was embarrassed, to go out in public, to do this, to do that. And that definitely, I think, just put more distance between us.
I definitely agree. I think, they, especially with immigrant families and families who have come from different countries into a Western world, it's quite difficult for them to, I guess, assimilate. And I guess that's another question as well. Do our parents have to assimilate to Western cultures? Do they have to abide by these rules? At the same time, I think it's important to understand that there are some cultural aspects when it comes to parenting from other countries, let's say in Asia, where, people in the Western world might look at that and go, this is not okay. So when I would come to school crying, my white friends, or predominantly white friends, would be like, we're going to go to the school teachers. You should not be doing this. You should not be crying. What are your parents doing to you at home? And then when the school would call my parents, they would say, well, this is okay. When I was young, I was put in a bin and I was rolled down the hills in the mountains of Nepal. Like, that's what my dad would say. So, it's a challenging aspect to kind of be in the middle of these two cultures, a Western world and then an Asian world as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because at that age, you're doing so much to just fit in and try to be like everyone else and try to maintain, who you are, but what that means around all the people that you're surrounding yourself with. And then it's funny because you get to the other side of, where I'm at today, and you want to differentiate yourself as much as possible and you enjoy your individuality, but it's so different when you're at that younger age in the teen years.
I completely agree. Like, it's young because it's not young. It's different because when you're young, you're exposed to so many different things. You've got peers at school, you've got your work peers if you're working at a young age, you've got your teachers that inflict these different types of, I guess, cultural norms on you as well. So for me, when I grew up, it was very difficult because my parents did not allow anyone to sleep around our house or me to sleep around theirs. And I guess going back to the first question of, when my rebellious behavior started happening, something simple as asking my parents, can I go stay around one of my girlfriend's houses? We're going to go play some Barbies and things like that. My parents would see that as being rebellious and talking back. When in a Western world, it's completely normal. People have sleepover parties at a very young age. Yeah.
So how did your parents respond when you first not listen to them or, talk back to them or do, if you ever get caught in drinking, Deepak?
I did numerous times, but the one that jumps out at me the most is, I was home with some friends. My parents were at work, and we had some drinks at my house, and then we had left to go to a party or somewhere. And when I got home, my parents were waiting up for me, and they had smelled, the cups, and within the cups, they could actually smell the liquor. And so my mom put me back in the car, and she took me to the hospital. to get a blood alcohol test because I refused to agree to the fact that I'd been drinking. And that's how severe she thought it was. She couldn't believe that I had done this. And I remember that night because we got to the hospital. They asked me to sign a consent form to release my bodily fluids, which I refused to do because I protested that, I hadn't had a drop. And we came back home, and I remember just how upset my parents were with me for a couple of weeks after that. But and there were instances after that too, where they found things in the house that, they found beer cans, or they found something. So it's interesting because that, it never really stopped me. When I look back at it, and it wasn't anything that I was trying to do to them, it was just something that I was trying to figure out for myself. And so, I'm not sure if they ever believed that it was something that, that I was doing because of something that they had done, but it was really just something that I was working through myself. And, when I look back at it from today, I realized that, I was trying to fill this void, as far as trying to figure out how I fit in. And, I remember even just starting high school, and I had ran for class president, which, I felt like I had no friends at the time, and I won class president. So out of 1,000 kids in my class, I was the class president my freshman year. But in that moment, I still felt friendless. Just like Melissa was saying, my parents didn't allow me to go out and do anything. And so I throughout, my entire junior high, my 7th and 8th grade years in school, I had not gone out one weekend over that period because my parents just didn't allow it. So, when I started high school, I didn't really even feel like I had friends, but yet, I had enough people vote for me to basically become the class president. But even with that, I still felt like I didn't have a single friend, and I was so lonely. And because of that, it kind of, pulled me into all these places where I was trying to search to fill that void. So, so yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, how, when your parents find you in these situations that, regardless of what they're saying in some of those moments, it's really hard to heed their advice because you're still so caught up in wherever you are in your head and what you're trying to get out of it.
I agree with that as well. I think for me, it was quite difficult to, I guess, fathom as to what was going on. In my mind, I thought that I was being, I guess, I was standing up for myself. And for me, when I was younger, I felt like I was very distant from my family. So in saying that, I believe I had a lot of internalized racism as well within me, because a lot of my friends were, white. That's where I grew up in. It was an Anglo-centric school. And the instances there was that me going out was seen as a bad thing. And I guess, certain things, like when I was maybe, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, my parents would say things like, "Oh, why are you dressed like that? Why are you wearing that skirt? You need to tone it back." When, those are things seen as a normal kid. This is what normal children do. They like to dress up. They like to wear a little bit of heels. They see someone at school wearing them, or they go into a magazine and they see a lot of people wearing high heels or wearing really nice clothes, and you want to emulate that. You want to look like that. So I guess those are some instances where I felt that, I was being okay, and I was very confused as to why my parents were being frustrated in that sense. So yeah.
So your parent noticed about your misbehavior, right? Did you blame your parent at that time? That that because of them, therefore they did not pay attention to you, they did not understand you, they didn't see you, or whatever happened to you, how you turn out at that time. Did you ever have a thought that say, because my parent, I'm I get into drinking, I feel so alone, so on and so forth? What do you think?
I didn't. So, I mean, my parents, they worked 6 to 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. And I mean, I came from a pretty large family. I have a twin brother, 3 older sisters. And so with them coming from India and then really starting from scratch over here and having 5 children and wanting all 5 children to get, into college and financially support us through college, they worked a lot. I mean, they did so much for us. Obviously at the time as a child, I couldn't see that. I just thought that was, what parents did. Only later was I able to see that. But I mean, they were able to buy us all 5 cars when we, got to 16 years of age. They paid for all of us to go to college, and it was amazing because they made very little with the jobs that they did have. And so, I don't ever remember thinking about the fact that I was alone because they were always at work. What I did was take advantage of the fact that they were at work by then, doing the things that I did in their absence. But there was never really a thought at that time that they were causing me to feel the way that I did. Later, and really in the last few years, when I've thought about it, I do think there was a gap, in me feeling like, because they weren't really there, as I was growing up. I've been able to realize that, and I think I was trying to fill that gap, with all of these other people that I was bringing into my life. But at this age, it's a lot easier to really, I think, understand that for what it is, and obviously, what they had done for me. And there was nothing about them not wanting to be there for me. It was just that they couldn't. So, but it's interesting at that time. It wasn't anything that I had considered. At this time, I understand it, but there's some clarity around why.
But you say that you have a lot of siblings, right? So there are people around you. There were.
Sure.
You have siblings, but how did you feel alone with a lot of siblings?
It's interesting. I have a twin brother and 3 older sisters, and I kind of, I think about that sometimes because we were all there in the house, and it was a small house that we all grew up in. But somehow I think I sat with my thoughts, and I felt a certain way, and it festered. I wasn't able to really process what was going on, and so I processed it in any way I could, right? Trying to make sense of it, because I mean, we as human beings, we try to make a meaning out of everything that happens, right? And so I gave meanings to things that were pretty inaccurate now that I can see. But yeah, with siblings around, it's interesting as far as how much you share, right? Because there's these thoughts that you have going on in your head, but we've never been accustomed as my family, or really any family that I've seen, or any even friends, to really sit around and talk about your fears and these thoughts that are going on in your head. I just sat with them, and I sat with them at that time, and really throughout my entire upbringing. And I think that was the biggest aha moment for me when I got older, as I started to talk about those things and then be able to get clearer, because as you speak about things, you get a little bit more clarity to really understand them for what they were. But at that time, I just sat with my thoughts, and I just let it fester for what I thought it was, which was by no means what was the truth.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that, because I know that when I was younger, my father was never really around. He was, busy doing business trips back and forth between England and then, between London and the south of England. But I guess for me, in terms of, if I blamed my parents, I would say that there were 2 main things that I guess the cause of what my rebellious behaviors was relating to. One, my family used to argue a lot. So my father is Nepalese, my mother is Middle Eastern. So they would always argue with each other with things such as finances, such as relationships. So that was one of the things that I would feel really, I guess, alone about. So as well, like with me, I couldn't process my thoughts. If I went to my father, he would then start complaining to me about my mother. And this is when I'm like 6 or 7 years old, where I can't even fathom what's going on when he tells me, oh, she can't do this and she can't do that. And then when I'd go to my mother, she would then tell me about the things that my father would do to her. Little did I know, as I've only recently found out, that the instances and the arguments they had were actually domestic violence. So my father would be very abusive in terms of his wording, in terms of how he, belittles my mother. Those are things that really stopped me from speaking to them. And it was also I would say, now looking in hindsight, a reason as to why I rebelled, because I couldn't speak to anyone. I couldn't speak to my parents. They were always fighting with each other. I was an only child, so I couldn't speak to anyone. It was just me and my own thoughts. So yeah, and that's why I guess I wanted to be like the other people in my school. I wanted to look like them. I wanted to be like them, because when I went home, the life that I had at home was very turbulent. There was a lot of arguments. I had to shut the room. I had to shut the door. Sometimes I would hear things getting smashed around the home. So at a very young age, seeing that, I'm like, I don't want to be here. This is not safe for me as a young child. And I don't feel safe in this environment. I don't feel like I relate to my parents. So I then went out and did things that were rebellious. And then the other thing was the internalized racism that I had, because I felt like when I was younger, everything that I would look at, everyone that I would see was, had beautiful porcelain skin, had blue eyes, had blonde hair, blonde straight hair. And yeah, that was another reason as to why I felt as a child I rebelled. And, sometimes I would look at my parents and I go, oh, why do I look like this? I get it from you guys. Why do I look like this? Why can't I look like them? Why can't I be beautiful like them? So I think in hindsight, I did blame them for some of my rebellious attitudes. But yeah, it's probably an accumulation of my loneliness, an accumulation of, I guess, the outside media perception on how I'm meant to look and how I'm meant to be. Also, my environment at school with young people telling me, oh, you should straighten your hair. Oh, you're very tall and you're very dark. And a lot of people used to actually mistake me as being black. So a lot of people used to tell me, oh, we had this school come in from Canada, and there was a lot of African American or African Canadian people that would come in and do this beautiful dance for us. And when we were in the bathroom, I was like 7 or 8, and one of my friends was like, oh, those are your people. And I was like, okay, really? I didn't know. I was that separated from my family and my background that I didn't even understand or fathom my heritage. And I guess I look back at my parents and I'd go, I blame you for not telling me. I blame you. I blame you for looking this way. And that was maybe one of the reasons, as to why I rebelled and why I wore those things that a lot of white people would wear. Well, not white people, but a lot of people in the Western world would wear.
It's unfortunately, it happened. And that is the reason for our conversation today, right? Miscommunication, violence at home. Yeah, parents are too busy working. They did not pay attention to each of the kids, right? The kids need. I grew up in a big family too, 9 of us. So I don't think I ever feel lonely, although I have friends in the neighborhood. I always go to friends' house and play with them, because yes, I have older sister, which is 5-6 years older than me. I have the younger, older brother who is 2 years younger, 2 years older than me. And then another younger brother, 3 years younger than me, and we always fight with each other. So I felt alone too, in a big family. I felt alone, and so I always went to a neighborhood's house and play with friends my age, things like that. Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from. As a parent, it's not that easy to raise a child, to put them in an environment that is safe, but allow them to grow at their own pace, right? As Asian, sometimes we are so protective. We don't want them to expose to anything. It's just like Melissa's parents, right? You cannot go to your friend's house. You cannot sleep over there when you come, when you come back, and what's their parents do and things like that. I relate to that. I related to that totally. When I were first came here and have my own children, before my children go to their friend's house, I always investigate my children to find out what's their friends' parents do, what's their parents do, and then I observe their friends. And I allowed my children to go to their friend's house to play, but then they have to come back. I don't think that I allow them to sleep at friend's house. I did not. Okay, but I was rebel. I remember when I was young, I want to sleep at my friend's house, and my parents would not allow me to do that. So, it's not the normal thing in Asia that we allow the children to go to friend's house and sleep over. It's not usual. So I totally relate to that. But now, my philosophy is find out where their parents, who their parents are, and just check out the kids' behavior. The kids reflect the parents. That's what I believe, right? So, as a parent, you are a parent right now, right, Deepak?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. So, as parents, what can we do to prevent this from happening to our children?
I think from my experience, I saw a study a couple of years ago, and it really intrigued me because it basically showed that this feeling of loneliness or rejection is similar to the same neurotransmitters in your brain are signaled as if you would be getting hit with a hammer. So it is actually physically painful to be rejected or to not feel like you're included or like you have friends. And so, I think understanding that it's, I think to a parent, you're trying to put food on the table, you're trying to keep your career, going and really take care of the family. And a friend seems like such a small thing, and not allowing, a child to go see their friends seems like such a small thing. But I think to that child, it means the world. When you look at, at our age, right, value is in currency, right? We talk in dollars. In a child's age, the value is really relationships and friendships, and how many friends you have. It really is what makes you feel good about your life at that age. And I think it still rings true even at this age, but I think it's making sure that, like you mentioned, as far as checking the parents out. And so if, let's say, the parents, don't match the same values, and you're not going to allow the child to spend time with them, then helping the child find better friends. But I think, this idea that, the child is going to find friends, and if they don't, you're just going to kind of leave them to become who they are and not supporting them in that endeavor. I think there's so much you could do to put them in groups, put them in, athletics, or put them into spaces where they can find people that as a parent you resonate with those same values, where then they can feel supported. So I just think it's something that needs to be consciously created and focused on from the parent's perspective, so that the child never really feels that, and so they don't have to go down, these other paths to find that same, that same support, that same friendship that they're looking for. Mm-hmm. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, Melissa, I know that you don't have, you're not a parent yet, right? What could your parent do to prevent this from happening again? Let's say they have another, a young Melissa, another child. Or you understand what I'm asking, right? Mm-hmm. What could they do to prevent whatever happened to you from happening?
I guess it's difficult to answer that because I'm not a mother yet, and I'm not a parent yet, so I don't know what it feels like to be a parent and have to have all of these intricacies and understanding your own childhood and then feeding that in your own children. But I think coming from my point of view as someone who has grown from, my rebellious background, I think one of the main things is, especially for me and other people out there who might resonate to me, is that I come from two completely different backgrounds. So, and I guess a third or a fourth even, because my mother is from Middle East. She's a Middle Eastern background. She's from Qatar, and my father is from Nepal. So I think one of the most important things, I guess, for me that I would have appreciated more would have been, understanding my actual backgrounds. So if my mother had told me, you are from this background, and, help me fathom that, that may have helped me understood as to why I look this way, why I don't look like my peers, why my hair might be a little bit curlier. And it would have helped me really understand and, tell the other children at school who were calling me black or would say horrible things like, you have ghetto features. Like, I don't even understand what that is. I think it's a horrible way of describing someone that is, that I just think it's so stereotypical to say that. And, what exactly consists of that? So I would say, if they were to educate me more and say, those, you are from a different background, I would have been able to tell those children, I'm not from this background, they are their own person. That is their own culture. This is my own culture. I wouldn't have gone and been like, I guess so. Okay, because I didn't know much about myself. I didn't know, who I was. I didn't know what my background was. So I think I guess, having my parents tell me that, it would have helped me come to terms with their cultural norms and their cultural understandings as well. And it would have helped me differentiate between the different backgrounds, because we all know within South Asia and within Asia and within other communities and backgrounds, there are so many differences. So, you can't say Nepal is similar to India. You can't say India is similar to China. You can't say, a different an Indigenous background is similar to another Indigenous background from Australia or Indigenous Americans. They're completely different, and they all have their own, problems and their own issues that need to be brought to light and educated on. So I think if they had educated me around that, that would have been better for me to understand and actually understand myself. And so therefore I can tell people, this is someone's background, this is my background. I am different. They are different, respectfully. So yeah, I think that would be one of the things that I would help my children understand, because when I do have children, they are also going to be from different backgrounds. It's going to carry my family, my mum, my dad's background, my background being brought up in Australia and England, and also my husband's background as well. So it's going to be, it's going to be a whole blend of things. So I think that's one of the main things to understand as a parent, is to really, again, I'm coming from a point of view, just thinking on the spot. So yeah, I think maybe having that understanding and that education around someone's background can help fathom all of those instances that a child goes through as well. I guess in terms of another thing would be, speaking to your children. And I guess if my parents had spoken to me and had been there for me, and instead of, brushing me off and saying, mental health doesn't exist, what is that? Really educating your children and educating children around that. That would have definitely helped me as a young girl, as a young woman, how to, I guess, fathom my thoughts and understand my thoughts, and feel okay as to why I'm feeling that certain way. Yeah. So I hope I didn't come across offensive or anything when I said, ghetto. If anything, it's something that, I think people associate with, and they look at me, and I feel like when I was younger, they would associate, me being slightly tan skin. Automatically, I was from that background, and I'm still learning to this day as to why they would label me that way, or even label anyone that way as well. So yeah, I hope it doesn't come across offensive in any ways.
Well, what we are here is to educate, to help other people understand there are the variety of differences in Asia, right? People, the Asian countries, right? And racism, people look differently, speak differently, would be discriminated, right? So, yeah, I do agree with you that as that the parent need to educate and share proudly to the children where they're coming from. For me, I am Vietnamese, and my husband is Taiwanese. Although both, it's very, on the surface, it's very similar. It's like Chinese because we have a lot of Chinese influence, right? But our family value is different, right? So, I spend time to let my kid know what's the difference between Vietnamese and Taiwanese, and vice versa. My husband is also share with them differently, on his perspective about Taiwanese and American, right? So they both are very proud to say, yes, we are Vietnamese, Taiwanese, and American. So they understand that they love the culture, they love the food, especially. We expose them to that. Although I did not have my children attending Vietnamese school when they were young, but I did have two of my kids taking some Mandarin Chinese lessons when they were young. And then afterward, I was thinking, okay, here we live in America. They better speak good English, and that's all is important. And when they grow up, if they want to learn the culture, if they want to learn the language, they can always take classes. I think the culture is day-to-day practice rather than just the language itself, right? The day-to-day practice and the food that we eat. So they still have those things, They know the difference between Vietnamese and Chinese food. So how long did these rebellious stage last?
For me, it was quite a while. I started down that road at like 13, 14 years old, like I said, and it lasted for me all the way till I was in my late 20s. So it was about 14 years, and so I made my way through high school and started at college. And you can imagine switching from high school to college and now having to find a whole new group of individuals to hang out with. And I left high school with like 10 to 15 really close friends, but I never felt close, because it was, nothing was ever enough. There's always, I think, this feeling like I didn't have enough friends, and like I needed to put more people around me to give myself some feeling of completeness. So, I mean, I got to college and I ended up, making a lot of friends as well. But I started drinking even more there, just because it was college. There was more opportunity for it, and then I got into some substances for a while as well, and it got really bad. I think for me, when I got into my third and fourth year in college, and I ended up taking 7 years actually to graduate from college. But as I was getting through that, I was barely studying. I was having trouble with passing classes, and this was my constant struggle. And on the outside, when people look in at that, they see this kid and they say, "Wow, look at this party animal. Look at this guy. He loves to just run around and be crazy." And it's funny because, when you look back at it, it was coping mechanisms to basically manage everything that was going on within you. I had this fear that, was I actually going to get out of college? Was I, was I actually going to find a job that I was going to be happy with? Was I going to be capable to do that job, right? All these what ifs that you throw at yourself. And so then, that it's slowing you down even further and caused me to drink even more. And so, 7 years later, which I thought 7 years was too many years to graduate, but now I know that 60% of individuals actually take 6 years on average to get through college. So it wasn't too terrible. And I did some multiple internships, but when I got to my job, it was horrible. It was not the job that I thought it would be. And so 7 years in school, and now I got to this job that was definitely not what I envisioned it to be. And so I was, super unhappy with now what I had spent 7 years getting myself ready for. And then I started thinking, is this it for me? Is this the rest of my life, sitting in this cube, doing this job? And so, I started to drink even further. And I just remember, there was a night where I was out and I ended up crashing my car going 70 miles an hour down, a pretty dark road in the pouring rain. And I hydroplaned. My car went front over back 3 times, and I ended upside down in an apple tree. And I ended up in the hospital for 2 weeks after that. I had, caused serious internal damage and had a significant surgery. And it's amazing because even that situation could not have get me out of my funk. Within 2 months after I had been fully recovered, I was back to doing everything the way I was doing it. It took another year. And then, there was this moment where I just kind of, I crumbled. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep, fighting my way through it. And I remember just crumbling and thinking to myself, there has to be another way. And I remember just sitting down and making a list of everything that I wanted in my life and what I didn't want in my life. And then I think a couple of days went by with me looking at this list. And then I started basically, going after it. And when I look back at how simple that was, there were like all these things that had run around in my head for so long that I just never wanted to deal with. And so as I started to deal with them, as I started to actually make progress, the light started to come at the end of the tunnel, and this dark period that went for so long, it ended. And then I ended up meeting my wife, because that was one of my items on my list, was to find, a really, great partner and a loving relationship. And then that kind of spearhead things even further. But wow, until I got to that point, and really until I met her, it was 14 years. And so it was a really long, long, dark night of the soul for me, which is, why I'm so passionate about talking about this, because, it could have ended really badly for me. I could have lost my life numerous times, that one in the car specifically, but so many other times as well.
So it took you 14 years from that time that you start to rebel to turn around. 14 years. Wow. I thought that's rebellious is most of the time coming from the teenager phase. So it's not that case, right?
No.
Okay.
No, because I think it's, if you're looking at rebellious from the standpoint of trying to, go against what your parents are wanting you to do, because you're trying to just try to go against what they're asking. I think that's one way of looking at it. But in my case, it wasn't that. It was really about me just being lost in myself and not being able to find my path, and not necessarily, having the guidance to find my path, or the willingness to even speak up to get the guidance. I was in my world, and I was almost embarrassed, I think, to where I was, because I felt like everybody else had it together. And so, in that moment, if everybody else has got it together and I don't, so I was just kind of going through it, pretending like I was fine. And inside I was just, I was fighting every single day. But it took me till that moment, after over a decade, to finally really crumble and realize I couldn't anymore. And I needed to move beyond that and start, fixing whatever it is that I was, running from.
Did you have any mentor growing up, or did you have anybody that you respect to talk to or give you guidance?
I did not have anyone like that. So my parents were obviously working constantly, and outside of that, my sisters, they went off to college before me, obviously, because they were older. And again, I didn't share much with everybody. I kept kind of things to myself, but I didn't really have anyone else in my life after I got out of high school. I think in high school I had a coach because I did run track and cross country, and so I had a coach, and I know he was always keeping an eye on me, and he would tell me when he saw me running off with the wrong people. I wasn't, I was open to listen to it, but I still was, I was still going to do what I wanted to do, and it wasn't because I was rebelling. It was because it's what I thought I had to do to fix what I needed. Melissa mentioned, just kind of how she felt about herself, and I think that was part of it too, because I had some racist slurs thrown at me when I was younger too, and bullying, and those were younger years. Those were like, probably 12 and 13, and I think that compounded my thought about me being different and me not being wanted and me not being able to have these friendships. And so that's I think that stayed with me for so many years, because no matter what, if I even created relationships, I always believed that they didn't really want to be there. They were just there because of something else. And so it was just but I think it's those early years when I was definitely getting those bullied and being called names because I was different. And where I grew up, there was very few, other than white people as well. There was, I think a couple of African Americans, and then there was, myself and my twin brother. We were the Indians in the school. So feeling that difference, I think really at that age, compounding on everything else, I think is what, amplified it even further.
What about you, Melissa? How long did the rebellious behavior last?
Oh, it lasted for a very long time. I would say, from a very young age, at the age of, 6 or something like that, it would start in terms of, calling my parents out or talking back to them. And then it, fed through towards my primary school years, my high school years, up until maybe I was, 18, 19. That's kind of when it dissipated and I learned more about myself. I am still learning about myself. If anything, I might still be being rebellious towards my family because they say, okay, you need to go and do this now. Why don't you have any friends anymore? Why don't you hang around with people anymore? And I'm like, well, the last time I did that, you told me to stay at home more. So yeah, I guess there's always something that my parents will complain about for me. So in that sense, I guess I'm still being rebellious, but I'm doing it in a way that doesn't target them or disrespects them. It more so comes in the point of, educating them about, things that's going on. It comes to sitting down and talking to them and saying, this is not okay. What you said to me about this before, about how mental health doesn't exist and, what you're doing to each other in terms of arguing, this is not okay. You need to figure yourselves out. You need to sort that out because it is impacting me and it's impacting people around me and how I communicate with other people as well, and how I think about myself. So yeah, I think it's still an ongoing process that I'm still learning from. Yeah.
That's not what I call is rebellious. Rebellious to me is like misbehavior, right? Whatever you just share, that you start to speak up for yourself, right? It's like an independent, you speak up for yourself. That's not rebellious to me. So like what Deepak said, right? It took him 14 years? It took him 14 years of drinking and hang out with the wrong crowd, aimlessly doing something with. Basically, he it's nothing productive for him at that time, right? So that's rebellious. So I think you already turn around, right? You already notice that, okay, you already stop doing the behavior that is I would call it misbehavior, like like drinking or smoking or do something that there will be a bad consequences, but you're still doing it, right? So that's what I call rebellious. So when did you start stopping that? When did you start realize that it's better to stop those behaviors?
I guess in terms of drinking and smoking, it was around that same time as well. So around 18, 19 years old, that's when I stopped those behaviors. I think I guess it stopped for a little bit when I moved from the UK to Australia, and then it started up again because I felt, very alone and very distant from everyone. So it did start to come up in that sense. But I would say it stopped around the same ages as well, of 18 and 19. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever shared or talked to your parents about the tough time that you had in the past? Have you ever tried to share, to let them know, say, hey, mom, dad, do you remember when one time I was like this, or, what happened? Do you know why I did that? Do you ever share?
I have, not with everything. There's some things that I just figure are better left for them not to know, to not provide any added stress to something that, they would worry about. But yeah, there have been moments where I've shared with them, hey, there was this time where, remember I did this, or I said this, and this is, this is why I did this, or this is what was really going on. I can't remember anything specifically right now, but I've shared those things. But I think, for the most part, the depths of the darkness that I went to, I haven't wanted to really take them there and tell them really, how dark it got and where I was and why I was there. I've talked to them lately, as I've, basically, started this practice and this business. And the reason for it is basically this time in my life and what I'm taking a stand for as far as creating in the world. And so they kind of understand it there, but yeah, I'm trying to protect them somewhat to understand to the full depths of what was really going on with me.
Did you share that with your wife?
With my wife, yes, I did share it with her by bits and pieces as we met, and over years. And so we've been married for 11 years now, and I've shared with her bits and pieces. And I think even just I can recall, earlier this year sharing some things that I had never shared with her about why I did this or why that happened in my life, and she was surprised. So I've definitely come more to terms with it all. There was a while where I just couldn't talk about it because it was just such a bad place for me to have gone. And now I've definitely come to terms with it. I've made peace with it. I've understood it. I've been grateful that I experienced it to put me in the position where I am now, where, it gives me such clarity on this message and, and how to share it powerfully and how I can help. So I definitely have come full circle, but it's been quite a journey.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Melissa? So did you share with your parents? Did you try to tell them, to help them understand where you're coming from or what you went through?
Yeah, I definitely tried to speak to them and, tell them about how I felt and how, not understanding their backgrounds and them constantly arguing with each other, and the microaggressions that were thrown around. So I felt like, when I tried to speak to them, I guess their responses was, but you were misbehaved, but you did this, but that didn't help you. That didn't help what you're saying. So there was a lot of, I guess, retaliation when I did speak to them about it, and I tried to communicate as to how I felt. So yeah, it is challenging, and it continues to be challenging to this day to actually try and fathom what I went through and speak to them about these instances. So yeah, it's something that I hope to speak to them more about. So they are still trying to fathom and understand, mental health and all of these issues that I went through and what it caused me and how it made me feel. So, yeah.
So let's share something exciting. Deepak, I know that you are working on a new project. So share with us what it is about and how is it related to your experience growing up.
Sure, I would love to. Just here in the last year, I created a personal development company for young adults called Volition Academy, where we help young adults, optimally transition to adulthood by getting them to operate at their peak performance, so that they can really create and live their dream life. And this really all came from this 14-year journey, and then really, the journey that I've had since, and what it took me to really overcome, all of these things that I experienced to get me to where I am today. And so, after I made it through the period, those 14 years after that, when I really invested in myself and my education and started really looking at things from who I wanted to be, I really understood that was what was missing. And so, what we do with these young adults is we get to the core of who they are, and then we look at who they want to become, and then we guide them on their journey to, where they want to go, to that dream life. And we do that through coaching and mentoring. And so far we've seen phenomenal results in, all aspects of their life, in academics, in their career, their relationships, and their health. And so, I'm really excited about, this next stage of my life and moving it in that period. And one of the things that you asked earlier is one of the reasons I really am passionate about this is one, because I really want to make sure that nobody else experiences 14 years like I did, if it's unnecessary. At the same time now, with having a 2.5-year-old and a 5-year-old and trying to figure out what would I do differently, I realized that, if I didn't do this, then what would I do when they became teenagers? And so I have almost a decade till they get to that stage. And by then, it should be a masterful approach, and I'm sure I'm going to be able to provide them the best support possible. And so yeah, I'm super excited about it, and I appreciate you giving me a platform to talk about it.
Young adult, so what are their ages? What would be ideal ages, and what would be your ideal client?
So my ideal age is around 17 to 22, but that really depends on the maturity of the young adult. Depends on where they are in their head as far as how much they want to actively look into the future and understand how they want to build their life. As far as from an ideal client perspective, it's really, I'm trying to support parents because parents are really the ones that are trying to understand what to give their child. And so, there was this thought that came to me at one point where, my parents came to the US to live the American dream. And, their idea of the American dream was to come here and then watch us, their children, have the American dream. And to their understanding, it was just, bring your children here, give them the best education, and then it happens. And that's not necessarily the truth, right? Because there's my story, and there's so many other stories like that. And so, understanding that it's not about just giving a child an education. There's a difference between an education and there's a difference between schooling, and really to educate the child on what's necessary to be, to really create the successes in their life, to build their self-confidence, to give them the ability to be decisive, to give them the motivation to really go after their dreams. That is an art. And that, I believe, takes the coaching and mentoring where we provide that service. And so, what I really want to do is make sure that people are educated to understand, that really this is needed along with an education, and that provides the best foundation to ensure that your child is successful and lives that life that you envisioned for them. And at the same time, as a parent comes here, from whatever country that is, and they try to create this life, when they get to that stage in retirement in their life, the worst thing that could happen would be them watching their child, struggle, because ultimately, they brought them here to live that dream. And so, I just want to urge people to start looking at this area seriously. And I think it needs to be a part of really every child's upbringing to really get them to their full potential.
Yeah, just like you mentioned, right? You grow up with no mentorship, right? There's nobody that you look up to that guide you to the right path. So imagine somebody like you, right? It could be an outsider, but who understand what they are going through.
Sure.
And kind of like help the parent, because parents, there's multiple reasons that they could not relate or could not guide the kids, their children to where the children can live to their potential, right? So
Sure.
finding somebody like you who gone through that path and experience the challenges, so you are like a big brother, right? So that they can relate to, you can share with the challenge, and maybe you can guide them as a mentor, as a coach. That's really wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What about you, Melissa? Yeah. Oh, right. Your project. Sorry. Okay. So your project, you, share with us what are you cooking? What you up to?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. So I am running a passion project called Asian Girl Movement. So it's a podcast and community that's focused on, I guess, highlighting and bringing to the forefront Asian voices and Asian female voices, or anyone who identifies as being female. Or in that spectrum. So it's a space for people to come together and talk about things that maybe are taboo, and that's some of our main topics that we focus on in the podcast is taboo subjects. So we talk a lot about what makes a person toxic. We talk about toxic relationships, toxic friendships. We talk about how can we make friends in this area when we're 20 or 30 years old. We talk about a lot of situations when it comes to relationships and how to have a safe relationship. And there's around 20 or so of us who come together and we talk about these topics back and forth, and we're just normal gals, normal people sitting down chatting about these things. And then we do bring in some experts as well, because we're not experts, we're not licensed to talk about these things, so we bring in other people and raise their voices as well, so that way it's an educated point of view where people are giving actual advice, where it's not so we're just saying to do things. So then when the experts come along, they're really wonderful, and we talk about a range of things. We talk about their own stories, we talk about their backgrounds, we talk about a whole range of things. And we're hoping to make it a space where people can also come together and participate in online and offline communications. They can chat to one another, they can meet up, they can make friends, because a big thing within people our age is actually, as I mentioned before, trying to find friends and communicate with each other and connect with their backgrounds and their identities. And we're definitely advocating for a lot of situations where trying to inform people around politics, because that's something that is really taboo, especially within the Asian community. What we believe in, what we don't, how to be more informed around those terms, how to be more informed to make the right decision to go out and vote. Who do we vote for? What are we doing when we vote? So just really understanding the depth of everything and unpacking a whole range of topics. That's something that I'm working on, that I hope to grow into. And where I hope that people can listen more to it. We have more guests on board, and just raising a whole range of voices from Asian communities, and it includes South Asian voices, East Asian voices, Southeast Asian voices, and Central Asian voices, because that's something that people don't really talk about a lot. There's a whole range of Central Asian countries that kind of get left out of the spectrum as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What are the age group that are ideal listeners for you, for your podcast?
Yeah, I guess I mean, it's open to everyone and anyone. I don't want to cancel out any voices. Like, a mature age voice is just as important as someone who is younger as well. So I want to be able to create a space where everyone can come and listen. And this doesn't even include, people from the Asian diaspora. It includes people from different backgrounds. Like, another really awesome thing is that we want to introduce, Ask Us, where people can call in. So it could be a guy who's dating an Asian woman saying, how do I deal with her parents? What can I do? Kind of thing. So it's a whole range of things. But I would say, in essence, our main focus is, 18 plus, between 18 and 35, or 18 and 40, 18, 35, I would say, would be our main aspect. But we are finding that a lot of people are interested who are really young, who are in high school, and also people who are mature age. So, yeah.
That would be wonderful. I think that would be fun to have a session where people can call in and ask about those things, right? Because a lot of people out there, they see the value from the Asian community, right? They recognize those values. And it's just that, to bypass the mother-in-law is it's very difficult. So they want to learn how to bypass her, right? The parents, how to deal with them once they get into the family. Yeah, I think that would be fun. And I think your podcast would serve so many needs in the Asian community. Yeah, so who do you wish to know now to support you or collaborate with you in the next 5 years?
Really, I am just looking for anyone that is passionate about, about helping, young adults, and that can provide me platforms to be able to speak my message and be able to really help and just make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else. So, anyone out there that is doing something similar to what I'm doing, that we can collaborate to really make more of an impact, or anyone that really has someone that is in need of help that they'd like to reach out and see how I can support and serve them, that would be great.
What about you, Melissa?
I guess I'm looking for a range of, people with stories to tell, people with amazing stories. Even this doesn't necessarily have to be someone who has had, an amazing success story where they've started out, they've started out in poverty and have grown to have these successful businesses and things like that. People who are still struggling, that's something that's really important to me, so that therefore they can resonate and share their current struggles, and to let other people know that, it's okay. The struggle life is okay. You'll get there. Things will get better, So I definitely want to be able to highlight those voices. So yeah, I think anyone who, again, is, similar to what Deepak has mentioned, someone who is really passionate about talking about a range of topics, about relationships, about, the Asian diaspora, about advocacy, around activism, politics, like a whole range of things that, we don't talk about within the Asian community, something that's really, really important, and has a lot of, passion around it. Like, I've had someone come up and say, I'm not passionate about, I'm not an expert in sustainability. And I said, well, if that's your passion, if that's what you want to talk about, that's something that's really, really important to actually highlight sustainable actions and the circular economy. And they were like, okay, great. That's something that they may not be as educated in, but they have the passion to want to talk about it. So I think that's really important to highlight their voices too, and to share their voices. So yeah, those are the sorts of people that I would love to collaborate with. Yeah.
So how do people reach out to you?
If they're looking for reaching out to us at Volition Academy, we have a website. It's www.volitionacademy.com. They can also hit us through email at support@volitionacademy.com, and we're here.
What about you, Melissa?
For Asian Girl Movement, you can follow us or, message us on @Asian Girl Movement on Instagram. We also have a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Asian Girl Movement. We also have our community. So the community hasn't launched yet, but we are growing some members, and hopefully that will launch really soon, where we'll actually, where it will kind of be an after show where people can talk about, how they felt about an episode, and connect with one another, and create friendships and meetups. So that's also a little secret Facebook group, but it is Asian Girl Movement Community on Facebook. So you can always search that up. It is on the Facebook page, so you can find that there as well. But the last one is, if anyone wants to email us, it's asiangirlmovement@gmail.com. Hopefully that came through.
Okay, thank you. It came through. All right. So thank you so much, both of you, Deepak and Melissa, for being here with us and share your experience growing up. And I hope that our listeners find it useful. For me, it is. To our listeners, what is the number one thing you will implement to help young people feel heard, seen, and supported? If you enjoy listening to this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the Asian Women of Power podcast. We will be grateful. Until next time, live life loud.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Asian Women of Power podcast. We encourage you to apply what you've learned here today to make your life a little bit better every day. For more tips, tools, practical ideas, and conversations around a business, life, and relationships, so that you too can live life loud, we invite you to join the Asian Women of Power Facebook group at www.joinasianwomenofpower.com.